I was just explaining to the audience the couple of topics that we're going to be talking about today. So the topics specifically of harassment and pay secrecy legislation as it impacts Australian businesses. But I know the conversation is probably going to roam a little bit further than that as well. Really interested to hear what you have to say. So do you want to introduce yourself properly to the audience, Natasha? Explain who you are and what you do?
Yes, my name's Natasha Hawker. I'm the founder and director of Employee Matters. We're an employee relations consultancy. We specialize in creating exceptional business performance through your people. Think employee relations, policies, recruitment, HRIS systems implementations, and terminations. We're great at helping business owners and managers who have limited time, money, and patience hire great people, and just as importantly, exit their non-performers. Here's what I believe, Joel. Exceptional HR is your competitive edge. And it's not just around fixing people issues. It becomes your competitive edge for more profit, more growth, and the sustainability of your business, which we all want more of that.
Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. So just to introduce myself as well, my name is Joel Smith. I'm the CEO at Affinity Payroll. We're an organisation that's based across both Australia and New Zealand, providing technology and services in the payroll space. But in today's session, we want to provide some proactive strategies for businesses that are looking at assessing risks and engaging their teams effectively, and obviously staying compliant in these areas that we've just described. So with that, we might just jump straight into the discussion. And Natasha, when it comes to, we're going to talk about pay secrecy first of all. First of all, can you, what is a pay secrecy clause?
This is a good one. And you and I are of an age, and I don't know what the age is of the demographics of our listeners today, but pay secrecy clauses, we used to have a gag clause essentially in our employment contracts that said basically on pain of death or even possibly termination, you would lose your job if you actually shared what you were being paid. These now need to be actually removed from your employment contracts. So I would ask everyone on the call, when did you last review your contracts? Do those clauses still exist in there? And if you do need a new contract, we don't do that, but I can put you in touch with someone who can. But I think as a first test of what we need to get right, we need to remove that pay clause or that pay secrecy clause from any employment contracts.
Excellent. And so can you summarize for us, what are the key changes to pay secrecy legislation?
Joel, I think the main ones here is you can't stop your employees from discussing it. So I'm perfectly within my rights to go to a colleague and say, can you tell me how much you're paying? And they might go, no, I'm not telling you. Or they might actually disclose. And if they disclose and I determine that we're doing the same job and I'm getting paid considerably less, I may look to raise that with my manager or my employer to find out why that is the case. And, you know, a big part of this pay secrecy piece is to increase the transparency. And that's an important thing that they're trying to do with this. And it's very counterintuitive because, as I say, we've had for so long that, you know, we just don't talk about what we're earning. And, you know, occasionally that pub chat happened and we were aware, but we were breaching our contracts if we did that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, look, we're seeing an increase in the legislation around not just pay secrecy, but obviously pay equity, pay accuracy. Like, what's the purpose behind these legislative changes that we're seeing coming through?
I mean, the major one is we do need to improve pay equity. So a big driver of this for the Albanese government is around ensuring that our female and male employees that are doing essentially the same role get paid the same. So I'll give you a brief example. There was a case in Melbourne. There were 3 chefs and a 4th chef joined them. She was female. They were all level 6 under the hospitality award. And one of them, she found out she was being paid $60,000 a year on that level 6, and the guys were being paid 80. She actually put her hand up and raised a complaint and said, I actually think I'm doing my job the same, if not better than them. It went to court. It was found she was actually better than them. And the findings would have been in her favour. However, she had resigned and left. But the court has sent a very clear message that had she still been in the employ of that restaurant, they would have been forced to not only bring her salary in line with the guys, but they would have been potentially at risk for fines for breaches.
Right, I see. So I mean, it might be self-evident, but where do you see the main benefit for employees then with you know, things like the pay secrecy clause
Yeah,
coming through?
I think the main benefit is we've lifted the veil on what people are being paid. And I think for many people, they've sort of had a feeling they may have been underpaid,
Yeah.
but it hasn't been clear. So it gives them access to that information. And, you know, they could go and see their bosses and say, I want to know where I'm at. Am I being paid at the same level? Now, let's be really clear here, Joel. I want to just say that, you know, if there is a good reason why Fred is being paid more than Mary, as in he is an A grade player, we call them volunteers, and she's a D player or she's a non-performer, then there should be a differential between their pay. But if they are being paid the same, performing at the same level, and it's irrelevant of experience, because that was the argument that the employer said, these three guys have had 20 years experience, that doesn't equate anymore. It's about the performance on the job.
Right, so I think that's an interesting point around. So tenure is no longer considered a good reason for there to be a pay discrepancy,
unless it's particular to the award. You know, for example, I'm thinking if you're a doctor and you have to have 7 years as a specialist in order to get that next level, then it becomes sort of award driven.
Sure. And then in terms of who the new laws apply to around pay secrecy, which businesses are we talking?
Yeah, and I think this will be an interesting one for the listeners because it's actually every single business. So in the past, I think a lot of smaller businesses, and smallers deemed to be under 15, they've sort of got some benefits around not having to have the same level of legislation that they're beholden to. In this case, everyone's the same. The only difference here is that you got an extension to when you were able to comply with this legislation. And I think that's the other big thing I would suggest to the listeners is most of what pay secrecy for a start has already been in play. And this is already something that everyone needs to comply with. So we need to make sure we are compliant with it.
And talking about compliance, yeah, what are the consequences? What happens if there is a compliance breach in these areas?
They are significant and they've been designed that way. So there are fines for both the company, which everyone goes, yeah, well, I'd expect that. But there's also fines for the individual. And I think in the particular area we're talking with your people, Joel, is that payroll people are on the hook for this and managers are on the hook for this. So if you are knowingly involved in a breach and you know that you're underpaying and you continue to do that, you are exposed for a fine. And these fines are per breach. So in that case that I was sharing with the 3 managers, that would be 3 separate breaches. And the big thing here is in the past, some unscrupulous businesses used to say, Joel, just pay this. We know it's incorrect, but just do your job. And if we ever get caught out, I will pay your fine for you. Well, they can't do that anymore. You are on the hook for your fine. I think it's really important that people understand that. There's another thing that we were talking about before called accessorial liability. And this is the government or the Fair Works attempt to try and throw the net further afield. So me as Employee Matters, if I go into an organization and I determine that there's an underpayment and I let the client know and say, I need to let you know you're paying $5 less an hour than what you should be. And I know that they continue paying that lower rate and I continue to work with them, I am liable as well. So that's accessorial liability. But what I would share before everyone really freaks out is where people, what I have seen with Fair Work is where people disclose and go, actually, I have made a mistake. They are very reasonable and they will give you time to remedy that situation. And it's really, really important that we do that and that you may be involved in a back pay situation where you have to retrospectively fix because it's wage theft, you know, it is, it's taken very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on to the next area, we're going to talk about harassment legislation as well. I just wanted to let the listeners know, I should have mentioned it earlier, that if you hang around to the end of the discussion, Natasha's kindly provided a little digital goodies pack for everybody on the on the call via QR code. So if you hang around to the end, you'll get access to that.
And it will really help them implement. So that's cool too.
Yeah, with some practical tools. That was great. And thanks for organising that, Natasha. We'll move on now to the topic of harassment. What are the changes there to legislation surrounding workplace harassment?
Yeah, I think this is incredibly topical, given some of the things we've seen in the news of late. But essentially, sexual harassment falls under workplace health and safety. So what that means is the same legislation that if you fall off a ladder, or you fall off a crane, or you're injured physically at work, it falls under that. So interestingly, does some mental health issues now as well. And we have a positive duty of care. So that means that every single business and every single manager, as somebody who's working in a business, has to do everything practically possible. So it's called a positive duty of care to protect their employees from sexual harassment in the workplace. So there's a lot in that.
Right, and in terms of Fair Work, the Fair Work Commission powers to deal with workplace harassment, what do those look like?
So they're significant. There are fines again, and in the worst case, guys, there's jail time on this, because that's forms in its extreme in WHS legislation. It can mean jail time. The example I will use here is there's a piece of legislation called Brodie's Law. Brodie was a young cafe worker in Melbourne. This is going back a couple of years now, who was being victimized and bullied in the workplace by both her manager and the owner of the cafe. And both of those people did jail time for what happened. She ended up taking her own life. So that was the absolute extreme. So it is high risk. I think the other thing is there's significant fines. So I'll give you an example. This happened in November 2023. There was a jeweler, I think they were Sydney based in this case, and a young female jeweler that was being sexually harassed by her boss. He kept touching her on her behind, and he was asking her for an intimate relationship. She was saying, no, I'm not interested. She ended up, after all the hassles, raising a complaint. He then victimized her, and she was awarded $268,000 for that sexual harassment. So it is considerable. And I think, the scary thing is that we now know that 1 in 3 Australian workers in the last 5 years have been sexually harassed in the workplace. And there are some industries, of which hospitality is one of them, where the incidents are probably higher than that. So it's really important that we're doing everything we possibly can to reduce sexual harassment in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And that previously you mentioned that positive duty of care. What are your tips in terms of how businesses can proactively prevent workplace harassment and discrimination, as opposed to just responding afterwards?
Yeah, it's interesting, Joel, because I think, for a lot of legislation changes, a lot of people are under the impression that you just put out a new policy, tick the box, and things are done. What I will say, and we're only covering the tip of the iceberg on all of the employment relations changes, it is the most Fair Work changes since Fair Work was introduced back in 2009, I kid you not.
Yeah.
So a lot of the legislation is deliberately designed to be both proactive and reactive. So one of the things in the gift pack, the digital gift pack that we've got, is what is the sexual harassment framework that you need to be following? And 4 of them are proactive, and 3 of them are what you actually do if there's a case raised. So what do you need to do to proactively prevent it? You need to do a risk assessment. So a business needs to sit down with their exec team and go, what do we think the risk of sexual harassment is in our business? Now, obviously, if you work in a bar, I worked in a bar and I used to get my bottom pinched as I was carrying my glasses, back to the bar. That was a long time ago. Wouldn't happen these days. But anyway, you need to do that risk assessment as a management team, but then you actually have to ask your team, because they may be aware of sexual harassment risks that you're not aware that they have. Then when that data's come back, you actually have to go, what are the risks that we're seeing here, and how are we going to mitigate those risks? And every business needs a leadership statement. So when we start with a new client, we send them our leadership statement that says, basically, Employee Matters has a zero tolerance of sexual harassment in our workplace and Employee Matters, but also when we're out on client sites. And you need to train your executive. There is actually formal training that your executives need to do, and then employees need to be trained so that people know what appropriate behavior is and isn't. And then that's starting to give you the protections that you need to make sure that you don't come unstuck.
Some really good practical advice there to help get that mindset shift in place. Thanks, Natasha. Just sort of going back to, we have obviously an interest in payroll at Affinity. Interested in your view, when we were talking before about legislative changes in that space, what are the potential implications for payroll teams with the introduction of those changes that we spoke about earlier?
Yeah, I think when we talk specifically about payroll, the biggest one I see for you guys is an increase in salary audit requests and analysis, data analysis. So I would be recommending, in terms of being on the front foot, that you actually do a salary audit and you go, hang on a minute, are Joel and Natasha being paid the same and they're doing the same job, or is Natasha being underpaid even though she's performing at the same level as Joel? So to review those male-female discrepancies, and are they justified because maybe I'm an underperformer? You've got that accessorial liability. So every person, and I've worked a lot with payroll people, and I've had the stories where people have been in a position where they've raised a concern about people being underpaid and management were not backing them, and they've actually chosen to resign and leave that job rather than take on that accessorial liability. And I really feel for them in that position. One would hope if you've raised that your employer would go, thank you for raising that. Now let's address it and get it sorted. The other big one I would suggest, Joel, is around domestic and family violence pay slips. So I think many people are now aware that we have 10 days paid leave. It's instant. Once an employee starts, male or female, they're entitled to it. But one of the things that I see as a downstream impact that not everyone's across is if somebody takes domestic and family violence leave, it cannot say on the pay slip that they took domestic and family violence leave. It has to look like ordinary hours work. So then you can think downstream impacts. We still need to have a record that they've taken that time, but it typically costs, I think the statistics are, it takes 2 weeks and $17,000 for somebody to leave a domestic and family violence situation. And so often those pay slips are going back to the the perpetrator. So we need to be making sure that we're protecting that confidentiality, and it's on a needs to know basis only.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good advice. And so look, we've obviously spoken about pay secrecy and harassment legislation, but we know, but that's potentially the tip of the iceberg. What other new legislative changes coming through that businesses should be aware of?
I think the other ones that I would say, and I think, I'm passionate about this as a former mental health first responder. There is a massive piece of legislation, which if you were worried about sexual harassment and what we call respect at work, I think the people at work piece is even bigger. So people at work is designed to try and address the mental health issues that we have in the organization or in this country, specifically around psychosocial hazards. So as I talked about with the respect at work, working out what our risks are, you have to do that with people at work too. And there is actually a survey that's been designed by Fair Work. We've actually done an abridged version because the Fair Work one's about 100 questions, and that might be right for some bigger businesses, but maybe not so much the smaller businesses. You need to do that assessment and find out what the psychosocial hazards that your employees are identifying are, and again, mitigate them. And you might run a focus group. So we've done this in Employee Matters, and I run a remote team of over 17 across Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines. And one of my risks is my team work from home. So they might have isolation or geographical issues. So what are we going to do to address those? So that's a really good example. But I think the thing we need to remember as managers, because I imagine a lot of managers are on this call, you need to make sure that everyone has a job description and it's accurate and people are paid correctly, that people are being given feedback, you're doing a good job, or alternatively, you're not doing a good job, and we can't overwork or underwork people. So there are a couple of key things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about addressing psychosocial hazards in the workplace.
And look, you're out there all day, every day, Natasha, talking to businesses about these things. And like, what are you seeing in terms? What are your biggest red flags in terms of readiness across Australian businesses?
Yeah, Joel, I think the big thing that worries me and sometimes keeps me awake at night is that still far too many businesses are not compliant. And what I'm seeing is awareness of employees is increasing. And what we typically see when employees become aware of their rights, then we see more complaints and more things raised. So if I give you an example on the respect at work, we had a client and we were saying, we've got to, this is months ago now, but we've got to get this respect at work sorted. And they're like, yeah, I know. It's just not high on my priority list. And the next week they literally called us and said, with a really serious sexual harassment complaint, of which we went through the investigation. The fellow was terminated, but they lost the lady as well because she didn't want to work there anymore. But they were two high-performing employees. Now, the situation with that one was they had not done everything possible to protect that woman from sexual harassment. And actually, in fact, they moved her to the other side of the office because the fellow who was hassling her was being too noisy. So I think the thing that worries me is that we're not compliant. And I think the reason for that, Joel, is that many businesses are still recovering operationally and financially from COVID. Here's a recent example. This was literally last week. There were 4 takeaway stores. They were systemically underpaying migrant workers, so vulnerable workers. They were falsifying records, so putting incorrect things on payslips. And the business was fined $4 million. And the HR manager who was complicit in this behavior was personally fined $105,000. So as we start to see these things on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald or the Melbourne Age, or the Courier Mail, we are going to see more people go, hang on a minute, I actually think I'm in that position. And they're going to start to raise those complaints. So we are going to see a lot of people retrospectively trying to fix what they should have done already.
Yeah. And what are you seeing as some of the benefits, like some of the real benefits of implementing these legislative changes into business?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one because I know I'm a business owner as well, guys. So I've had to do this to myself, and this is what we do for our clients. So I get it. I get that it's onerous. But I think there are a number of benefits. And number one is we're still working in a highly, what I call a tight applicant market. It's still really hard to find talent. And retention is key. You want to keep your people in your business. It's really expensive to lose them. It costs between 50 and 150% on top of the base salary when you have to go out and hire again. So if you don't need to hire, you don't want to be doing that. And you want to be keeping your best people. But remember, like some of these changes, people might go, well, we've already had some of these laws in this place. And you're absolutely right. But remember, most of these are about creating a great and a safe place to work. And I think businesses that treat their team really well, they attract the best and they also retain the best. And that then increases what we call productivity and engagement. So engagement is the score of discretionary effort. What will make someone go above and beyond for what you need? And for many people, when you get a 75% score and above, you get 21% more productivity and 20% more profitability. And who wouldn't want more of that? So I think that's a really important one. I think we need to tie this to, this is going to make us run better businesses, more ROI on what we're investing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, a note to the audience, I'm going to ask Natasha one more question, and then I'm going to give you guys a chance to in fact, if you want to ask questions, feel free to type them into the chat screen or use the chat function at the bottom. I should have said that at the start, but if you've got any questions, just type them in there. We'll do our best to answer those in a moment. And while you're busy typing away, Natasha, I've got another question for you. Businesses that implement changes to stay ahead of this legislation and remain compliant, what are some practical and effective ways that they can communicate those changes internally? Not just the education piece, but also to let the workforce know that these things are in place?
I think number one, Joel, and you're in the position of a CEO, lead by example. You know, leaders need to step up and own this space and be very comfortable with the fact that this is good for business and it's good for employees. I think you absolutely do still need to have a great policy, but you need to run, and as I said at the beginning, these policies have been deliberately designed to be more proactive and action focused and ongoing in their design. So there are times where you're going to have to review those risks that you identified, and is that still a risk, or is it moved on? Have we got another risk? And you need to have your team, your exec team across this and have completed the training and speaking from the same hymn sheet as you are, as the CEO and leading the culture of the organization and how we show up here. And I think the last one I would say is run those sessions for employees. And I often hear, business owners saying, oh God, if we run a session about sexual harassment, everyone's going to say, I've been sexually harassed. There sometimes is a correlation because people have been educated, but take that as a blessing, because if they come to you and say, this is happening, it may have happened and you're able to deal with it, or it may not be sexual harassment and you're able to deal with it. Either way, it's bringing it to the surface rather than it bubbling along and then blowing up in your face, like what happened in that previous example where I said we did that investigation for that client. They lost 2 really good quality employees, other than the fact he was doing the wrong thing from a sexual harassment perspective.
Yeah. No, it's great. Thank you, Natasha. Some really good practical examples and pieces of guidance there. I really appreciate it. Now I'm just having a quick look in the chat function, and it seems like you must have proactively or preemptively answered all the questions on the way through.
Joel, I'm going to give them a little bit of extra incentive, and I should have said this at the beginning. So I wrote this book called From Hire to Fire and Everything in Between. I've got 2 copies of this. One is for the person who's the most active in the chat box or the most active with the questions. And the other one is for the person with the best question, as I'm going to throw to you, Joel, to work out. But this will help you. And I often say while we're waiting for some questions to come in, because I'm hoping I'm going to get a curly one, which I'm going to have to go back to my team, because my team are infinitely better than me, to say, hey, I got this curly question. Can you give me an answer? And we'll get back to this person. I think, our managers, I often feel for them, Joel, because they haven't been effectively trained on how to hire, manage, and exit. And if we could just do those 3 things really, really well, productivity lifts, everybody gets better at their job. So that's a really key one.
Also, we have a question that's okay. So the chat function is definitely available for you. So what is your example of the legislation that's been around for the longest but is the most ignored?
Wow, that's a great one. Great question. I would say it's the respect at work stuff, because it got a lot of publicity when it came out. You'll remember the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and there was 55 recommendations. The government said we have to do them all. And then you see, really high profile things like what happened at Parliament House happening still. And I think the thing that I would say around sexual harassment is I grew up in the 90s in dealing rooms, and I can tell you we had strippers in the dealing room, female strippers every Friday. That was just the norm. And if you told me it was 1 in 3 Australians in the last 5 years, back then in the 90s, I would have gone, yeah, that's for sure. What frightens me is we've still got those statistics in 2024, 2023.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that worries me, because I think one of the challenges, Joel, as we're thinking about it, is we now have 5 generations in the workforce, from baby boomers through to your Gen Zs. And they all have a different view on sexual harassment and what it is and what it isn't, and different tolerance level. And I think because of the very proactive nature, I am finding so many businesses who have not done that risk assessment. They've not done that risk mitigation. And let's talk about what the fines are, because we didn't cover that. The fines for an individual are up to $19,000 per breach for the individual, and up to $90,000 per breach for the company. So you can see how quickly they can escalate. And in systemic breaches, it's like $939,000. So you can't ignore this. You need to resource it, and you need to, and we're just tip of the iceberg here. There's a whole lot more. There's casuals, fixed term contractors, union access, discrimination. You now need to provide a safe space for a woman to breastfeed, and it's not the toilet. So, there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to happen that I would suspect many people on this call are not across.
Interesting. Another question that's come through. What are the impacts of a hostile work environment in terms of micromanaging employees?
Yeah, I am firmly of the view, and even in a tight market, your disengaged, not engaged, or non-performing employees cost you 34% of their salary on average. So if you're paying them 100K, you may as well be throwing $34,000 out the door. So I am firmly of the view that we need to manage non-performers out of the business. They're toxic. They often, you know, what I find when we go into organizations and help them exit is a lot of the employees go, oh, thank God you've done that, Joel. I wish we'd done that ages ago. I've been carrying that load for that individual. So I feel for whoever that person is. I think my view is when we've got really good employees and really good systems, we shouldn't have to micromanage. Most people, not all of them. There is always going to be a small percentage which are just dreadful, what we call prisoners, low levels of capability, low levels of engagement. But most people want to do a good job. And I think we need to come at it from that perspective. But I often think, and we see it at onboarding, people don't onboard people correctly. They give them the job, there's the job. And now we go, learn by osmosis. So we don't set them up for success. So there's a whole lot of things that we need to do so you don't have to micromanage.
Okay, thanks. And we've got another question through that's come through on the Q&A function here. This has come through as an anonymous attendee, so I'm going to read the question. Fine. But if you want your book, anonymous attendee, just put in the webinar chat and say, that question was from me, and we'll see who you are. So the question is, I'm wondering what the requirements are for reporting that the workplace education in this space is complete and up to date. Do workplaces need to proactively record which staff have been trained and then report on this, say, on an annual basis, for example?
Yeah, I would suggest that is a really good thing to do, to document who's trained. So, you know, when any legislation like this changes, there should be training across the business. And some businesses do that digitally, some do it face-to-face. I actually think face-to-face where it's possible is really useful. The reason being is you can have that when you've got a good facilitator, you can draw out those questions and debunk the myths rather than someone passively just listening to, you know, digital presentation of what sexual harassment is and isn't. But do document it, because again, and this will help protect you as a manager or as a business. If you've taught Mary what sexual harassment is and isn't, and Mary then sexually harasses, Fair Work is going to go much harder on Mary than you as a business owner, if you've done everything else that you're meant to have done. So I would suggest when people are onboarding, you need to train them. Annually is a great or a minimum level of training, because people forget and they go back into those old norms as well. So yes, I would be documenting everything so that you can say, hang on a minute, hand on heart, we have trained our team and we are doing everything possible to mitigate that risk of sexual harassment.
Excellent, excellent. And thanks for that question, Paul. We now know who you are. We can send you a book. Another question here. What are some green flags of a positive work culture? I think so. A nice question. What a positive question.
It's a great question. Yeah. So what I'd love to do, Joel, is after this, and anyone who wants it, I'm going to send out a little video called the Employee Commitment Model. And what it does, it puts people in quadrants of prisoner, conscript, trainee, volunteer, superstar. You would probably already, even just from that very brief summary, know that you want volunteers and superstars. Now, when I go into businesses, I go, okay, if we do this roughly, you know, gut feel, where do we reckon we're at? And they're like, well, I think half the team's in conscripts and prisoners. And I'm like, they need to be out the door or moving back into that volunteer space. So the green flags here is you have a great culture. And I always talk about culture being the secret sauce. Culture makes people go above and beyond for you, not just because you're paying them for a salary, because they're really bought in to what you are trying to do as a business. I'll give you an example. One of my team members, Ange in Melbourne, I was due to do a speaking gig on the 23rd. That's cancelled, late notice. I've gone, I'm going to be coming to Melbourne. And she's gone, right, I've organised this meeting, this meeting, this meeting, and this meeting. And I didn't tell her to do that. But what do you think that's done? You know, for me, I didn't have to instruct her to do that. She just took the initiative. Now, is she an A player or a D player? So productivity, we have a problem in Australia. We need more people in that superstar category. What I would describe superstars, Joel, you can go through your business, and if I asked 20 people in your business, who's the rock star, they would go, it's Fred. Everybody knows who the rock star is. They're that top 5%. So you want to make sure those top 5% stay with you and they bring their mates along, because guess what? Good people know good people. So, you know, it's a really simple one, but have a star search program that says, hey, you know, if you're a front of house person or you're a manager in an aged care center and they're really good at their job, say to them, do you know anyone else who might like a job? Because generally they've given a good rap and a reasonable understanding of what that business is. So someone's coming in sort of pre-sold and knowing what they're getting into. And also that person has a vested interest in keeping that person successful and safe and setting them up for success. So that's a great way of hiring people, especially in the tight market we're in at the moment. We cannot recruit putting an ad in Seek. You've got to be much more clever about it.
Some good advice and a good question. Thank you, Yoriella, and apologies if I've mispronounced your name then, right? I think you categorize as our busy bee on the questionnaires, so I think a book's coming your way as well, I would say. Okay, we haven't got any more questions in the chat function. Perhaps Mel, maybe would you like to pop up the QR code? And Natasha, do you want to just
I'll talk people through it.
What's on the other side of this QR code?
Yeah, so here is what is behind this. So number one, it's a guide on, and it sounds funny, what is sexual harassment, what it is and what it isn't. And it's got a whole lot of little tips there, because sometimes I think some of us have lost our immunity, you know, some certain jokes aren't appropriate, that's sexual harassment. So there's a guide of what it is and isn't, and that might be telling for some people. The second thing that's in there is that sexual harassment framework. What do you have to be doing from a proactive perspective as well as a reactive? And what I will say here is we've moved much more towards a trauma-informed investigation, trauma-sensitive. And you saw that in the judgment recently on Brittany Higgins. The judge talked a lot about what a person who would be experiencing trauma and what the implications of that are. And in a way, we've never had that. So there's been a shift there, which is really interesting. The third thing is a checklist. So you can go, have I done that? Have I done that? Have I done that? Or have I done that? Good, I'm all sorted, which is really important. The checklist, everyone loves a checklist to know whether they're doing what they need to do. And the last thing is I've done a little ROI video, which is, you know, what's my return on investment and what's my risk? So I just talk you through a lot. We talked about green and red. That is really clear in that video. But what I would like to suggest, Melissa, is afterwards, I'm very happy to send that extra one. It's not on there, but that extra video around the employee commitment model, your prisoners and your volunteers. Because I think that's really effective for people to go, what do I need to be doing with my team? And they will be able to put people in that box just after listening to that and then take action accordingly.
That's great. Thanks for that walkthrough, Natasha. And I think that's probably given people time as well to get their smartphones out and take a snapshot of the QR code. So it's all good. And of course, at Affinity, we'd love to talk to you about helping you with payroll, if that's a pain point for you at the moment, technology or services. No QR code on screen, but if you visit our website, affinitypayroll.com, you can have a look there and reach out to us. We'd love to chat. But I think that's us now. We're pretty much at time. So I really appreciate you all spending the time with us today. Natasha, thanks again for your time and for joining me. I always love our conversations and look forward to the next one.
Can't wait, Joel. Thank you for having me. And remember, your employees really do matter.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Bye.